to get my live stream going. All right, I think we're good. I think the live stream is up and running, I believe, hopefully. Yes, all right. There we go. All right, happy Friday, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well. And we are kicking off the morning with a couple birthdays. All right. Fantastic. And Canadian musicians. All right, because today is Neil Peart's birthday too. Yes, definitely arguably one of the best drummers ever. However, my drumming fans out there is a guy on Instagram. And I've not had a lot of drum lessons, but there's certain things you can just do. How many of you know someone who can just draw? Right? They just can draw. There was everyone else in second grade, and this one kid who you knew was some distant relative of Picasso. Like, wait a minute, why does this kid draw so much? I could just drum. I always could. I could just drum. But there's a guy on Instagram, and I can't even pronounce his name. And some of you might have seen him before. If you're a drumming fan, because we're talking about Alex's birthday and Neil Peart, yeah, his name is El Esprio Ciberano. Oh my gosh, the stuff that this guy does, if you're a fan of drumming, he's reinvented drumming. You know what I'm talking about? Jeremy, he is so talented. And, it's interesting. I could never play the piano. I played the violin for 7 years. I can play the guitar, been teaching myself the bass. But this guy can take both feet, play the hi-hat with one rhythm. He used this double bass, and then, yeah, he's unreal. And then you realize what the human mind is capable of. But I'm going to bring it back to trading. You and I are managing news. We're managing our emotion. We're managing what we see, and we're running it through the distillation of greed and fear. Then we've got to actually act on it. Then we've got to position size. I mean, I look at what we do as traders as probably one of the best things you can do for your brain in terms of neuroplasticity there is. And by the way, we have to keep up with certain cultural things. We keep up with technology shifts. You've got to keep up with technology if you're a trader. And I look at any of these things that just make our brain work in a way that it has to be better than the month before, the year before. But I look at that guy as a drummer and I think, we kind of do the same thing as traders. Amazing. All right, so let's get to it. We've got the preliminary University of Michigan data coming up at 10 a.m. Is this a big deal? It is for today, right? There's preliminary and there's revisions, and then there's the actual University of Michigan. They really milk it, and good for them. But it is data that when there is an absence of other data in terms of what else are we focusing on, we're definitely going to see possibly some volatility at 10 o'clock. So for us this morning, let's kind of get down here to the reality of this time crunch. We have a time crunch to 10 a.m., which means that with that particular bit of data that's going to be released at 10, I want to be able to get the day trades in by latest, preferably 9:45, hard cutoff 9:50. Okay, East Coast time. Always, you can see the clock in the upper left-hand corner. So that's the plan. So time crunch to 10 a.m. means day trades must be set up, filled by 9:45, 9:50 latest. That gives us 10 to 15 minutes then to be able to get our fill and possibly follow through, and then maybe hit the eject button. All right, eject button. What does that mean? That is a time-based stop. So most of our stops are based on some metric of price on the chart or the value of the option of the stock that we have. But there's also a time-based eject button, that's stop loss. And the time-based stop loss, or the time-based exit, it's not even a stop loss, it's an exit, is, hey, if we have a particular event and I don't want to sit through the wick and the volatility, it's a choice around risk management, right? Not how much could it move if I'm right, but how much could it hurt if I'm wrong. So we always have that potential time-based exit. And I would basically say it's about a minute before the hot zone. right? So 9:59. If we had, for example, a trade open into FOMC Wednesday, usually I'll make the time-based eject button 1:30 if it's a 2 o'clock event, or even just before 2 o'clock. But those are the kind of things we need to think about. What does time mean? A lot if we are talking about different events. All right. So next up is looking at, yeah, we do have some open swings and around 10:05. We'll revisit that. Remember, Freeport McMoran hit the first target yesterday. So whether you took the 25% premium gain or whether you scaled out at 325 after we got in around 170, remember, we're now at a break-even stop on Freeport McMoran. We have a new trade in Amazon on, which looks fine. And also, I know some of you are still in DHI. So again, depending on where you are, those three, definitely two, Amazon, Freeport, but Amazon, Freeport, and DHI, the three open swings right now. All right, so let's see what we have here. All right, let's get to our other symbols that are on the radar here. Crude oil's up, by the way. There's some sanctions on India and China for buying Russian crude. So crude oil's higher on that, presuming demand, I would suppose, for U.S. crude. And the NASDAQ is the early leader to the upside amongst the indices. NVIDIA, I just saw this news. I don't know if it's going to play out much, but I saw this news this morning. NVIDIA stepping back from their cloud computing business. We may see some volatility, but NVIDIA has not been a great trend. NVIDIA has been in chop easily since August 20, and it's been bearish since August 29. So I'm not looking at NVIDIA as really even bullish chop at the moment. I have not been playing NVIDIA at all, but that news is hitting. And of course, NVIDIA is heavily weighted in the NASDAQ, in the XLK, and in the SMH. So let's see if this offers any clarity, because I'd like to get NVIDIA back on the list, but it just doesn't merit it, especially since semiconductors have been such laggards in terms of those top performing indices. All right, so next up is looking at, Freeport. Yeah, we knew when we got into Freeport on the news of the mine closure, there could be a lot of volatility. It's really not that much lower than the 45.92 that it closed at yesterday. It's a little bit lower, but remember, once we hit that first target, move it to break even. So break even could be the entry trigger that was in the original alert, right? Break even could also be the value of the option. So I paid 170 and 165. So I could use a 165 break in for those 43 calls. So remember, when we have our alert that we send out in the room, and let me do this here real quick. I'm going to copy the alert from the 9th here and put it on the screen. So when we send out an alert, what happens? Well, it's always going to be sent before the trade triggers. That's the rule here. We don't do fill alerts. We're not doing post, right? Oh, I got in. Now you can take a look at it. We always do setup alerts. So this is what goes out. It's a swing trade. We buy the 19 September 43s. This was our zone. So we were above that zone when this went out. So when it gets down to that level, we can buy the 19 September 43s. The next thing we want to keep an eye on is looking at the first target, which we hit yesterday. That was that 46 level. Hey, pup. All right, the pup indicator just walked in. Hey, sweet girl. All right, 46. And then the risk to the target was 25% of what I paid for the option. In this case, let's use 170. I got a 165 fill as well. So once the T1 is reached, this is the important part, right? If Freeport happens to tumble today, once a T1 is reached, the stop loss is 5 cents below what I paid for the option. All right. So keep that in mind as we manage this winner. We don't want to let a winner turn into a loser. And that's how we interpret those setup alerts here in the room. All right. So let's get to it. And let's see here. Let's start off with a look at the S&P. Not because I like this one best, but because I'm really curious that with the NASDAQ above the previous session close, see that there? Here's our dashed orange-ish line. And the Dow below the previous session close. Puppy, you want to go outside? Okay. Pup wants out. Can't blame you, girl. Enjoy. Get some sun. Pup's going to get her vitamin D. All right. So with the Dow below the previous session close, we know that the S&P is now going to be in that tug of war, right? Nas is trying to move higher. Dow is trying to figure out what it wants to do. Will it stay below 46,141 or not? Can the Nas stay above 24,000, major psychological level? So if the Dow can break 46, say 150, and the Nas stays above 24,000, the S&P will be in play. Until then, I'm really not all that concerned about what I'm going to do with the S&P because it's a non-starter. For now, I would be bullish the Nas, right? That's definitely something that I'm open to. And I would, in about 4 more minutes, determine if there are any individual NASDAQ sectors in an uptrend because as long as, which is my interest, as long as the NASDAQ's above 24. So I'll check that around 9:35. And by the way, what sectors am I looking at? Semiconductors, technology, communication, consumer discretionary. We could even add sort of a honorary fifth with the telecommunications, which overlap with the communications overlaps with telecommunications. I need some coffee. And that's the IYZ ETF, telecommunications and communications. And that's where you've got T-Mobile, Verizon, Charter, Telephone, all those stocks that are weighted in XLC, but also in IYZ. So you can even throw that one in to see if that one's helping out either. So far, looking at the charts here, so far nothing's really grabbing me. Gold is above the previous session close. And by the way, gang, you'll notice I've been sending out an alert the last couple of days because a lot of folks were getting back into September. A lot of folks are getting their sea legs again for the fall trading season. So I've been sending out a how to day trade the first hour of the morning video. I don't know, it's been running 8 or 10 minutes. And I walked through what we did for day trades that morning. And I'm going to keep doing it. I'm not hoping, but I'd like to be able to also cover a loss. We haven't had one yet, but I'd like to cover a day trading loss so you can see the management of that as well. Who knows? I always say that. I mean, I don't want to lose, but the best thing I could ever show any trader is what I do when I'm losing and how I manage the risk. Because look, reward management is great. We had a fantastic Amazon trade yesterday. We had some winners the other day in AMD and in TLT, but covering the losses is probably the thing that I'm actually most passionate about. And I've always had a rule. I've always had an observation. The only people that don't like to talk about losses in their trading are the ones that have lots of them, right? To me, yeah, we're going to lose. If my win rate is 70%, I'm going to lose every 3 out of 10 trades. It's going to happen. But how we lose matters so, so much. All right, so this is gold. It's above the previous session close. Even if we get down to this Darvis level, that too is above the previous session close. So I like this as an early look at potentially GLD. So let's set this up and you'll get a really good idea of how I like to set up a trade in front of a level. So notice we're not saying get in now, right? That's not helpful, right? Any more than a GPS telling us to turn right now is helpful. I had one app do that to me once. Turn right as I'm driving by the street. Delete, right? I'll go to something that gives me a heads up. So if I take a look at GLD and I'm looking at what one I'm going to look at here for that pullback, the 335 calls. The 335 calls will be at the money, but for today, September 12, I'm going to end up going with the 334 because the 335s will likely be under $1 by the time we get down to that level. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. We'll have to keep a really close eye on that. I need it to be above $1. Now, when do I want to enter that? Um, an aggro trigger, remember, not only denotes it's the first opportunity to get in, but it's a certain amount of our budget. Remember, it's 25 to 33%. And I'm going to look at that when gold gets down to 36.77.20. All right, 36.77.20. And then I don't mind to call the moderate 36.75.5. Do I have a conservative? Not really. So I'm not going to deploy any more than 50 to 66% of our budget, right? Really important. Head on over to the Sector Secrets Mastery Room Files Drive, and you'll download that Excel spreadsheet that automates the whole, how many dollars can I spend at each trigger question. So scale out, it's going to be 3682.2. Notice what I'm doing is cutting the Darvis in half at automated level, and then I'm going to go with a halfway mark. Okay, so that's the first thing that's on my radar here this morning. All right, GLD. Now GLD's moving, or GC and GLD. Now, if that's moving higher, what about GDX? What about Newmont Mining? What about those sectors and stocks that are related to this narrative? Interestingly enough, Newmont Mining, wow, that's really volatile. See the wicks that are just completely ignoring and just dissing the support and resistance of the Darvis? That's almost a stay away kind of warning. AEM does look a little bit better. AEM does. All right. So that would be something that could be interesting. All right, let's go see what the option chain looks like. Now, the challenge with having both AEM and GLD is that they're really tethered. They're either both going to work likely or they're both not going to. Do I have liquidity on September 12, AEM 153, which would have to be a 150? No, the AEM option chain is crickets and tumbleweeds. Most of the options are well below 300 open interest. Can't do it. No can do. The Hall and Oates School of Trading. Can't go for that. Okay, what else do we have here? I really want to get a read on the NAS before I do anything. And none of the NASDAQ sectors are even bullish momentum. Wow, that's disappointing. So we waited about 5 or 10 minutes, right, before we make any big decision on indices. Remember, gold has been trading for hours. Gold is not in the same way subjected to the Wall Street bell in terms of sentiment the way, say, stocks would be. And indices are just a collection of stocks, right? We can call them futures contracts or whatever, but they are stocks. So take a look at the move there on the NAS. That's not necessarily a helpful move, but, okay, this is a little aggro, gang. So let's put on our very aggro hats here. We know that very aggro simply means I'm going to reduce size, all right? So very aggro. And that's going to be QQQ. This could be interesting here. QQQ, 12 September. Now, by the way, gang, if we have an open swing, all right, if we have an open swing, I'm not going to look to close that until at least 9:45 or 10 o'clock. So whatever Amazon may or may not be doing, and NASDAQ's been volatile, right? So we'll circle back to that in just a bit, all right? But I'm not going to close anything out there until a little later. And I want to get wicked out just on the volatility of the open. So QQQ, September 12, I'd be looking at the 584 call. And let's see if the NASDAQ doesn't come back down to this area between, actually where it's at right now, 24.15 down to 24.006. Now, if you want to treat 24.15 as aggro and you want to treat 24.006 as moderate, that's perfectly fine. In that zone, we can look at long QQQ. And I say very aggro. So remember, very aggro means reduce the desired account risk on the position sizing guide, 2%, 2.5%. We're going to tighten the stop loss to a 15% stop. All right, we're going to have a tighter stop loss because there are certain elements of this trade that we know are less than ideal, but it's oversold. It's at support. It's still above the previous session close, albeit not by much. It's a neutral structure. So I could be long or nothing here. I'm not going to short this. It's long or nothing, right? The T1 scale out on the way back up, just like we did before on gold, I'd like to see 24.33. I'd like to see 24.33. Remember, this is very aggro. I know some of you will say, Rog, thanks, but no thanks. But again, definitely something we can look at there. Plenty of time. Look how long it hung out in this zone to be able to scoop up those QQQs. All right, hung out there for quite a bit. All right, so that's the NAS. Now, let's see what else we've got here. Amazon's a little heavier than I would like. There's no question about that. We'll take a look at that around 9:45. That's the earliest I would consider cutting Amazon. 10:05 is usually what I wait for. Okay, so we'll definitely circle back to that. And the reason I don't want to get stopped out in the opening 10, 12 minutes is because look at those candles. This early look is just orders getting filled, and we can see, orders getting filled all over the place, but it's not necessarily organized in terms of what we want to see. Follow through become. It's not necessarily indicative of follow through, right? Some folks might chase it up through 24.60, and some folks might have chased it down and shorted it at 24. We realize we're just sort of stuck in a range. We really don't know yet ultimately what it is that we're going to see. All right, so that's just a quick look at what it is we're going to be doing here this morning. And we'll keep an eye on Amazon. I don't have an issue yet. But we'll keep an eye on that one. We've got gold on the radar. It's got to pull way back before we get there. We got an open NASDAQ trade and who's got the NAS right now? Who's got the NAS? QQQ. Look, because I put this in the language of NQ, notice that everything is in the language of the NASDAQ futures. If you're trading NASDAQ futures, micro NASDAQ futures, if you're trading, I don't trade NDX, but if you're trading QQQ, it's all the same conversation. But I use NQ as my touchstone because this thing's going to trade 23 hours a day. At the bell at 9:30, all my indicators have already been calculating volatility, support, resistance, Darvis, my top tier secrets, my secret squiggle, overbought, oversold tool, the structure, the everything's already calculating, as opposed to that sudden start in the QQQ at 9:30. All right, so let's see how this goes. And we'll take a look at Amazon here in just a little bit. That is our morning prep. So let's get to work, although we've gotten to work pretty soon here this morning.